Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your regular weekly episode of the Yellow Card Podcast. It is season 2. This is episode 2. If you're watching us on YouTube, you may realize that there is a familiar face missing onto the program. Unfortunately, Chris Jones couldn't be on tonight. It is Halloween. It is in Boston, so things do happen here and there. But we are accompanied by a fantastic host. If you are listening to us on Spotify, you're going to be blessed by his voice very soon. It is none other than a good friend of the podcast here on Twitter as well, Andy Deossa. Andy, how are you doing, sir?
What's going on, Diego? Pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, Chris might be trick-or-treating or whatever, but I'll help out and fill the voice. But yeah, happy to be here.
Man, it's a pleasure having you on. I know we talked here and there to try to have you on, and we finally have managed to do so. It's a pleasure having you on. Andy, the crowd knows about me enough. They know that I'm here at DJ in Boston. I'm Colombian, born and raised. That this is my bread and butter here, the podcast, because I'm a soccer enthusiast. So is Mr. Jones. But let us know about you. Give us a little bit of background on you, what it is that you do today, and fill us in.
Yeah, man. I'm a New Englander myself. I'm from Rhode Island, so
okay.
New Englander my whole life. I actually just moved out to Los Angeles just about 4 years ago now.
Okay.
But I've been working in sports for a decent amount of time now. Started in Boston. I was working at the Boston Globe over there, and then I hopped over to ESPN for a bit. And now I'm currently at Yahoo Sports, based in LA, like I said. So it's been pretty fun to just kind of move around and cover a bunch of different sports and do a lot of different things. I currently work in editorial and content for Yahoo Sports, so I do a lot of stuff with really every sport. But then I also spend a lot of time covering soccer here domestically with MLS and the national teams, and more recently covering some more Mexico stuff as the World Cup gets ready to get swing. So just doing a little bit of everything. But yeah, I've been diving into the soccer space a lot more in the past few years since I got with Yahoo, writing and things like that, joining different podcasts and stuff like that. So it's been fun. And like I said, the World Cup is around the corner. So it's going to be fun to see how that unfolds. Unfortunately, it's in November, but at the same time, it's still a World Cup. So we have to be excited.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Unfortunately, it is in November. I'm kind of glad that it changes the pace of things of how we see the World Cup. We've been so accustomed to having the World Cup during the summer that people just quickly transition out of that onto a more hectic environment. So it's kind of nice that we'll get everything all in one bundle, the holidays, the World Cup, November, December, that time of year coming around and whatnot. So it's really cool. I also see on your Twitter profile, you got your name is accompanied by the Colombian flag. Are you born and raised there? Are you from Colombian descendancy or?
Yeah, no, I was born in Rhode Island, but both of my parents were born in Medellin, and I am
very nice,
as Colombian as it gets. I'm a big I think the culture, I think anybody, whatever race you are, whatever ethnicity, I think the culture is something that people, sometimes if you're not from there, if you don't spend time there, like I say as firsthand with a lot of my family members that are also Colombian, but maybe don't spend enough time embracing the culture. So I definitely, as I grew up, found a way. And in Rhode Island and in New England, there's a lot of Colombians, so it makes it easier. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in Colombia this year itself. But yeah, super Colombiano, man.
Oh, I like it. I like it. I was born and raised in Colombia. My mom is Colombian as well. So I agree with you. No matter what culture you are, having that additional culture to have in the background while living in America is always really nice to have that in the background. So speaking of the World Cup, let's dive into today's episodes because we got a lot of content coming down your way for those of you listening or watching us. Let's talk about the World Cup. It is quickly approaching, about 3 weeks or so. We'll hear the first whistle coming out of Qatar on November 20th. That's when the first match will kick off. We've talked about, who we see as potentially winning the World Cup. Some teams that, might be good to keep an eye on here and there, but let's dive into a little bit of more content and let's start teasing up the World Cup a little bit more. We know who the 32 teams are participating in this year's World Cup. What are some teams that you could see potentially impressing this year?
I'm going to start with Canada. I think that I think that they were just very impressive during the qualifiers. It's one of those things that because they're a team that hasn't been there's kind of like a little bit of I guess skepticism for people to say, hey, maybe we're high on them because they went through qualifying well. And granted, CONCACAF qualifying is not as challenging as others may be. But when you look at that team, it's actually built really well. They've bought into whatever John Herdman, the coach, is preaching up there. And I think that that's very powerful for a country that's really trying to, prove something. And I think they have proven stuff to this point, but now this is a whole different level. So, I think these last friendlies are kind of tough to judge them off because it's, like we mentioned, it's in November. So it's a very different, I guess, approach to the World Cup and a different time of the year, which changes things and injuries and things like that. But I'm just going to go back to the point of them being a very solid team, them being very impressive in qualifying and being that hungry team. I think there's an ability for them to kind of go in with not too much pressure, but make a statement. And you look at their group, I mean, Belgium is obviously tough and has some world-class players, but Croatia, I don't know if I'm as worried or if I would be as worried about them as people were in 2018. And then Morocco is kind of just an outlier. So I think there's a very good chance that they do get out of that group easily and then are able to make a run. So I'm very impressed with what they've done in the past year or past years rather. And I think that they're trending in the right direction. I think when you see teams trending in right directions, typically they have good showings at tournaments like this because it's kind of like the next step for them to grow. So I that's like my number one team that jumps off the paper for me for sure.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. What are your other two teams that you could see potentially impressing in this year's World Cup?
I like Ecuador, probably because I spent a lot of time watching them in qualifying. So that might be a reason behind it. I think that they were also very impressive in qualifying. I think they died down a little bit towards the end, but it's natural. Qualifying is a different beast. The thing about them is the way that they've been playing in the past, these past few games have not been as up to par with what they were doing beforehand. And I think there should be some, I guess, reason for like, hey, maybe we kind of value this team in a high way. But if you look around the 32 teams, like a lot of the European teams are not, I don't think, as dangerous as they traditionally are. Like you have your Germanys and your Spains, and maybe Portugal will be able to do something. But it's like France is obviously dealing with injuries, and there's a lot of things that you have to factor in. And I think that, I mean, maybe biased once again, but I think qualifying in South America is just the hardest. So I think it gets you acclimated and it gets you kind of through those wars that you need to succeed in a tournament. It's no surprise that you see teams from South America in these past few World Cups be successful. In Colombia 2014, you see Peru make a run in 2018, things like that, because the qualifying, you are playing against players that are, expected to win the tournament when you look about Brazil and Argentina. So I like Ecuador. I'm not as confident in them as I was, let's say, like 4 months ago, only for the fact that the Netherlands obviously is a tough team in their group. Senegal, it's those African teams, sometimes they are very, very tough to deal with in tournaments. You don't know what you're going to get. And then they have the opening game, and the opening game is one of those things, like a game that they probably should win. But, if something goes wrong in that game, then I think they're already looking kind of a few steps back, looking like the wrong way for them to make a run. So I'm not as confident, like I said, in them as I was. But I do think that there is a chance for them to kind of be pretty impressive. And it's one of those teams that maybe the world stage did not watch much of them in the qualifiers because you think South America, that's not the first 4 countries that jump off the paper. But the way that they played, I think they definitely deserve that I guess that praise and that keep an eye on them type tab. So I'm excited for them as well.
All right. And last but not least,
I'm gonna go with Denmark.
Okay. I like that.
It's one of those things that, like, obviously the Pogba news that comes through today changes a lot of things in that group.
Yep.
And France in general, like France is very talented. We know that, obviously, winning it the last go around, but we know how hard it is to repeat as a champion. Number one.
Very true.
Number two, they've kind of just been in a situation where there's been so much surrounding that team. And they're not going into this World Cup the way they did the last one. So while I do expect them to win that group, while I do expect them to be one of the better teams in the World Cup, I don't expect them to just be the best. And I think that there's a very big chance for Denmark to be able to sneak through easily as a second team in that group. When you look at who they're with, Australia and Tunisia, Australia, they get in after beating Peru in that qualifiers, in that playoff game rather. So I think that Denmark, they have a talented team, one. They have experience too, And I think a lot of those players that are on that roster, meaning the experience, have been in these situations where when you see how they looked in their Euro tournaments in these past few years, they've been really, really good. It's one of those teams that just play a style of soccer that you could see it being a complicated team to deal with in a tournament. So listen, man, if there's one team that besides Canada that I would tell people to watch for and could make some shocks, it would for sure be Denmark.
All right. I like it. For me, my three impressing teams this year could be Wales, Senegal, and Spain. I'll start off with Wales. Wales is in a qualifying group with England, Iran, USA, and themselves. The story that they have written so far just to even get to this point has been an impressive one. They started off in a really rough shape, qualifying through the European qualifiers. They then found a way to mold themselves together and really find that chemistry, much like what Manchester United is going through right now at this point in time in the Premier League. It took some time for them to gel together, but they decided to gel together. And Wales is running high on that energy. When you got speedsters on both sides of the wings and Daniel James and Gareth Bale, I mean, that's as dual of a threat as you can possibly get for Wales. Coming into Qatar, where it's going to be their winter season, but it's still a somewhat warm weather, and those two being speedsters, that gives a major factor, especially when playing teams like England and USA that will be physical, but they get tired out of that rather quickly, especially in very warm weather like it's going to be in Qatar. So I see Wales potentially being an impressive team. Moving on, Senegal. Senegal is without a doubt one of the teams that could easily write a phenomenal story for the African teams that qualified. When you got it forward like Sadio Mane playing for your national team and in the best form that he's been throughout this whole entire time, even through Liverpool and now in Bayern Munich, there's a team that could really, really draw out a lot of attention. Out of Group A, me personally, I see Netherlands and Senegal moving on to the next round. I see the second spot being between Ecuador and Netherlands because Ecuador could also be an impressive team. I like their youth. I like their speed. I like their physicality. I like their tactics. They just need to keep those emotions under check because they're a very emotionally driven team, in my opinion. But moving on, Spain, on the other hand, Spain is interesting. It's a nation that has gone through some lows as of, after winning the World Cup, they've gone through some lows. And I feel like that happens to almost every single team that has won the World Cup at this point. It's taken Brazil however many World Cups to finally win one. Again, this could be the year that they could win one again. This could be the year that they flop, even though they have an amazing team altogether. Spain is that team for me. They have a lot of youth. They have decided to make some tough decisions, like, for example, not bringing David De Gea onto the World Cup, which they have relied on his services all throughout for the past, I don't even know, 10, 12 years at this point. But when you got in your team, people like Rodri, you got others that you're building around in that midfield. This is a team that could really draw some damage. This is Alvaro Morata's last World Cup as well. Participating for the Spanish team, he is ensured to be having some playing time. There's another name that I can't think of, so I'm relying onto my Qatar World Cup album. That it's a tradition in Colombia. It's a tradition all in South America. So some of you, if you're doing the World Cup album, congratulations to you and keeping that commitment alive. But speaking of, back to Spain, there are some names that stick out to me a lot, especially in their development right now. Ansu Fati is developing fantastically in Barcelona. When you look at their defense, Eric Garcia, Jordi Alba, Laporte, Pau Torres, I mean, that is a very good defense right there, consistent of youth, speed, physicality, and tactics. That's exactly what you need to bring onto this World Cup. Then you look at their midfield, you got somebody with a lot of experience there in between Koke and Sergio Busquets. That's a lot of experience. That's like going back to, the Iniesta and Iniesta and maybe even Busquets again.
I was saying, Busquets was running
yeah.
it.
I would say maybe Iniesta and Xavi in terms of
Xavi, for sure.
yeah, in terms of experience. The only thing that I could see them struggling though is getting those goals, because besides Alvaro Morata, you only relying on Ferran Torres, and Ferran Torres is more of a winger rather than a straight forward. So that's the only thing that worries me about Spain, but I could see them actually impressing. I think a lot of people are low on confidence in them because they're still a very young team. But a lot of the playmakers on this team are playmakers on their current club teams that are deciding factors and that are making the changes needed when adjusting to the game. Moving on from the impressing teams, what are some teams that we could see shocking, like either in a really bad way or in a very, very good way?
That's a good question. I mean, I hate to say it, but the US right now, I don't know what to think of him. I don't know what to make of him, which is, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing for the amount of pressure that it feels like is on this US team. But I think when you talk about certain injuries and right now they're kind of limping into what should be a monumental tournament for them. Talent-wise, it's obviously there, but I don't think they're at their best. I don't think they will be at their best. But think weird things happen in tournaments. So I could see them being a shock both ways. They either just having a bad tournament or having a good one at that. So I think they're kind of just stuck in the middle right now, and the expectations are, I feel like they're high here in the US, but if you think about them on the world stage, I don't know if they're as high as we make them out to be. So I think that's one thing. I think I'm focusing on Portugal, because I know there's always a lot made about having a guy like Cristiano Ronaldo on your squad. Well, I think that this is kind of a different Portugal, and kind of the same around Argentina as well. If we talk about Messi, where in the past years they've been so reliant on that one star and need that kind of person to drive the team and be the guy for everything. And I think both Portugal and Argentina right now are at a point that they have this newer talent that it could really help Messi and Ronaldo out. And I think that in terms is going to benefit them in the long run. So I think that Portugal could have actually a really good tournament with a guy like Ronaldo with the ability to be able to just change the game in a moment or to give you a clutch goal here or there. So that's one that I would not be surprised to see a shock run from them. And I can't call Argentina a shock because they're obviously one of the favorites to win, but for sure I would say Portugal there. And I guess let me say Mexico for the case that I've been following them for the past few months more closely. I just think that it's such a weird situation where this is also a team that has good talent right now, but the coaching is what is the big talking point for Mexico. And with Tata Martino kind of just stuck to his ways and just doing what he's going to do, I think that has been their downfall. And obviously they're waiting for two big injury concerns to find out if Jimenez and Tecatito could make it. They're not looking great. So I think that's, once again, speaking to people here locally in LA, which obviously a huge Mexican fan base and population, the confidence is I mean, it's never really high when it comes to World Cups for Mexico, because they always,
but it's lower than the usual, right?
But it's lower than the usual.
I bet.
I think that I mean, honestly, I don't want to say this, but I might see them not getting out of their group, and that would be kind of like a for sure disaster for them to not be able to make it out of the group. But I think the overarching thing is Tata Martino. This is it for him.
Yep.
Like he's done after this, and if he's gonna go out, I mean, that'd be one way to go out. But obviously, Argentina should win that group, and then I mean, Poland is good enough to maybe make Mexico's life tough there. So I mean, I'm not saying they're gonna go on the group stage, but yeah, I think they're gonna be a shock in terms of they should be a lot better than they will be.
So speaking of Mexico and speaking of Tata Martino stuck to his ways, what do you make of his decision to not bring Chicharito and Carlos Vela to the World Cup? I mean, I get it; they're both of age. Yeah, but man, those two, when they put on that green Mexican jersey, they are complete different monsters. It's like Harry Maguire when he plays for England. He's a complete different monster. He puts on the Manchester United jersey, he forgets how to be a defender. But what do you make of that decision?
Yeah, so I actually wrote about Chicharito being left off probably like a week ago or so. And it's right in my ballpark because I'm here in LA. I talked to Vela, I talked to Chicharito throughout the MLS seasons. Vela, for sure, he said he doesn't want to go. So that's why Vela is not really being counted on. He said that his time with the national team is done, that he wanted to make way for the newer generation, which, you know, sure. I mean, I think a player of this caliber definitely has a space, but if he's saying that, then for sure. Chicharito's
very humble.
Really different case. Chicharito wanted to be there. Chicharito deserved to be there. You know, always so much made about MLS and that talent being able to, I guess, transform on a big stage. But you're not talking about a player that just has played in MLS. You're talking about a player that has played at Manchester United, has played at Real Madrid, that has, you know, is the leading goal scorer in Mexican history. And I think just for the sake of respect and him being in the form that he is right now, which is a pretty good form. He had the Galaxy finish the top 4 in MLS this year. He scored, I believe, 18 goals or 17 goals this year, 18 goals last year, something like that. 35 in the past 2 seasons. I mean, it's not like he hasn't been playing well. So I think that there's definitely a case when it's a soccer conversation. There's definitely a case for Chicharito having and should be there, because you look at their forwards and none of them have been very effective. And Mexico's problem in this qualifying cycle, and even these past few years, has been not enough creation in the final third. When you have a player like Chicharito, who is literally known for creating in the final third and scoring, it seems like a no-brainer. There's obviously internal stuff there between Tata and Chicharito, but Chicharito did say this year that he has spoken to Tata, that he has apologized to Tata, and that he was ready, you know, doing all he can to be called up to that team. So that ball was in the court of the Federation in Mexico and Tata Martino, which clearly did not see it fit to add him. But Chicharito is such a polarizing player that any little mishap that happens with this Mexico team in this World Cup, Chicharito is going to be the conversation. So
100%.
That's going to be that piece that if Mexico fails, that's going to come right back around. So like I said earlier, Tata's time is done regardless, but it's just, he should be there. 100% he should be there.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the potential, you know, roster for Mexico, and besides Raul Jimenez and Irvin Lozano for an offensive threat, there's really not a lot of names that stick out for me. Besides the midfielders, obviously the midfielders are good. You know, you're looking at Guardado, you're looking at Gutierrez, Hector Herrera, you know, you're looking at Corona, you're looking at those guys. But in terms of an offensive piece, you need somebody to complement, much to your point, you know, much to that creativity and that dual threat, maybe a triple threat. And you need somebody to complement Jimenez and Lozano really well. That person should have been Chicharito. I don't see, you know, not to speak badly of Rogelio Funes Mori, but I just don't see him being that player that Chicharito can be. I don't see Rodriguez being that player that Chicharito can be. I'm shocked at that decision. I am. The Bella decision, like, okay, I get it. Like, now that you mentioned, you know, he didn't even want to go either. I mean, you know, kind of makes sense. And I get the younger generation piece of things, you know, with Diego Lainez and Rodriguez as well, being available to participate and being a lot younger. I get that. But man, there's an aspect to be said about seniority and what they bring. And I think that was a slap to the face of Chicharito there, that decision.
I think that's what to me, it came down to being ultimately disrespectful. I mean,
a
player that's, like I said, the leading goal scorer in Mexican history, and one that's playing well currently for the past 2 seasons is, you know, like I said, and if it's just a soccer conversation, to me, it's a no-brainer, but clearly there's other stuff besides soccer that's making that decision what it is.
So in your personal opinion, if Tata was to leave Chicharito or Guillermo Ochoa out of the Mexican team, which one do you think would be more of a immediate influence as to why Tata would lose his job?
I'll probably say Memo, just because he's been more consistent in the pool. I mean, Chicharito has obviously had a great success with Mexico, but this past few years, the reality is what it is, unfortunately, with him not being there. I mean, Memo it's so weird because even now you see the Mexican fans in such like worry that they're even starting to think like even Memo shouldn't be the starting goalkeeper. And I'm like, man, this is the guy that like has saved you Mexico over and over. And it's like, he's been a god. So I think that would, while some fans might appreciate Memo not being there or being a starter, I think that would be the ultimate, like, nah, this guy is absolutely tripping. But Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting cycle for this team for sure, because like you mentioned, there is talent there. The only spot that they're really lacking at is up forward, and it's a World Cup, man. If you don't score goals, you're not going to progress. So it's really that
Yeah.
simple.
Yep. Yep. All right. So moving on. I think for me, the shockers for this year are three teams. Two would actually probably one of them could be predictable, which is France, especially now that we know about the injuries with Conte and Pogba being considered out of the World Cup for this year. They need Aurelien Tchouameni to step in. They need Camavinga to step in as well. I don't know if those two are ready for that type of pressure. I like Camavinga a lot. I know that he's got a lot of talent. I just don't know that they're both ready for that type of pressure. And I could see France flopping big time this year. Griezmann is not up to the standards that we know he can be. And besides those, like, yeah, you got Nkunku, you got Mbappe, and you got obviously Ballon d'Or winner Karim Benzema on there. But I think the situation where France at this point is much like the situation at Real Madrid. Something happens to Benzema, and who is their key moving piece after that? Right. I know Mbappe is a great peacemaker and a great creative mind. There's no question about that. But is he your threat that Karim Benzema can be on set pieces? Is he your threat that can disrupt the defense very quickly? I don't know about that. So for me, France could be the team that could flop tremendously. Moving on from France, for me, Japan and Belgium are flops this year. Belgium, while yes, second best national team in the world right now, according to FIFA rankings and all that stuff, for me, Belgium is not, it's not all that it's made out to be. Looking at this roster, Courtois is in a phenomenal form, but I think Courtois' pressure gets to him a lot more than it needs to get to him when he wears the national team jersey. Besides Courtois, Simon Mignolet, he looks good for I think he's playing right now for Benfica, if I'm not mistaken. No. We'll come back to that. But for me, Mignolet is not the same person that Courtois can be behind the pipes. Looking at their defense, not a lot sticks out besides Bertanga and Thomas Munia. Other than those two, not a lot stick out to me. Tielemans is not even in the shape that he needs to be. Right now, if you look at Leicester City, he's barely a factor there. Then you look at moving forward, you look at Witsel, Hazard, and Lukaku, and you're kind of like, okay, I wonder which one of the three is going to be the diva of the whole entire team. For me personally, I think it's Lukaku because that's his late behavior. But besides those three, the only person that could really make a difference for Belgium is Kevin De Bruyne. And we all know that a team is not made of one person, it's made of everyone else around it. So for me, Belgium could be a potential flop this year. And Japan, for me, it's Japan, man. There's not much that can be said. They got a very tough group for themselves. When you're dealing with Spain, Costa Rica, and Germany in the same exact group as you, that is a lot of variables of soccer to be played against. And I just don't think Japan has the tactician for a coach that they really need when facing those three nations. So I think Japan might be the one to be quickly eliminated out of the first round. Those are my three shockers. But moving on from the World Cup, again, starts November 20th. Pay attention to all the amazing content that's going to come out from all the people in the sport right now. Andy, I'm sure, is going to be bringing out a lot of great content through Yahoo Sports. Make sure you check them out. We're going to be plugging in every single update that you need to know about the World Cup up to the day that it starts and through the whole entire tournament. So make sure that you're following us. But moving on, let's move on to the Champions League. We got Champions League action happening tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Very big day for some groups, especially Group D. We know it's Tottenham, Frankfurt, Marseille, and Sporting Lisbon right now. Every single one of those teams is basically in the qualifying stages, should any of them win and should some of them unfortunately lose. So that group is up for grabs at this point. We heard about a couple of teams that are completely out of the Champions League this year. Those are Juventus and Barcelona. So Andy, my question to you is, if you were general manager or the owner of both Juventus and Barcelona, in your mindset right now, what needs to change at Juventus? Let's start with Juventus to be to soften the start.
Man, I think Juventus is in the rougher situation, if I'm being honest. I think that they're kind of in a moment that you look at their roster and it's like, all right, man, what are we doing here? Because I think that a lot of these teams see, Champions League on a certain pedestal, and as they should. But when you're slipping in your league, I think you have a lot of other things to worry about than how you put up against European opposition. If you can't really put up against Italian competition, which they're known for running through Serie A, like it's no problem. So like I mentioned, you look at their roster and there's no solid goal scorer. That's one problem that just automatically, if you don't have a guy up there, you're not going to, once again, like I mentioned with the World Cup, if you don't score goals, you're not going to be successful in tournaments like that. But then you look at players and you look at Di Maria, who has proven to do some stuff for them, or Cuadrado, who in the past has been okay, but like they're both 34 years old, which I don't want to say is old, but when you look at the way soccer's built up, you get into those situations. Bonucci is like 35. Sandro's on the overside of 30. So there's these players that they're staples for this team. But I think that the way that the game evolves and the way that things change, there's too much of this connection when you have younger guys like Weston McKennie trying to make a splash, and he's not really fitting into perhaps what they're trying to accomplish. So I mean, obviously losing Ronaldo in the past is it kind of puts you in a certain situation, but I think that everything is going wrong with them, if I'm being honest. Like there's just coaching is not well, the roster's not well. And like I mentioned, I think before you could think about being successful on a world stage like the Champions League, which is obviously such an incredibly difficult tournament, you need to be good in your local tournament. And Juventus, which has traditionally been that, has not been that in the past few seasons. So they have a lot of questions, and man, like I said, I think there's more than one issue there, and they have a lot of addressing to do. And it starts from the top down, man. If you see that the coaching there is not doing, what it needs to be doing, then I think that's kind of like the first sign. But I wouldn't put it all solely on coaching. When you, like I said, you look at that roster and you see that there's a lot of flaws there as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think for Juventus, they basically need to do what, not to bring United again, just because I'm a fan of United, but in a way they kind of need to do exactly what United did. They need to clean out that locker room. They need to get rid of some stars and start to create some budget in which the coach is heavily involved in those decisions. Let the decision of rebuilding the club come down to the coach, who knows the players better and the culture in the locker room, rather than what you think of it at a higher level, sitting there as like the owner of the club. I agree with you. Defensively, they need pieces moving forward for their future. Bonucci's up there in age. Sandro's up there in age. Then you're looking at Cuadrado, who will probably want to be transferred out of Juventus, especially with what's going on there. I think if he was to transfer out, he deserves a shot at another big European club, because he brings a lot of talent to the table.
Right.
You certainly need forwards. I mean, you don't have an answer up front. You really don't, especially as Juventus. And I think the most important piece they need to do at this point, not to knock on the guy, but you need to get out of the Paul Pogba contract. It's a very lucrative contract that's tying up a lot of money that could be used towards building that club around with higher prospects. I mean, sure, United kind of took away all the talent from Ajax that was being built up by Ten Hag and Van der Sar when they were running the club. but there's still a lot of talent to tap in through Ajax for Juventus. I mean, you're looking at Edson Alvarez, for example, could be a perfect replacement for Paul Pogba, somebody even far more aggressive, younger, not very injury prone, and could be a good tactician in the midfield for them. So I agree with you for Juventus, not just a managerial part of things that needs to change. And I don't believe this is all in Allegri. I think Allegri walked into a very bad situation. They need to write it out with him in order to build some confidence and culture in the club. I think at this point, it's just you need a major clean out in that club. You got a lot of personalities that are already stuck to their ways, and some new blood needs to come in and inject a better culture and positivity into this whole entire team. What about Barcelona, though? Barcelona's kind of in a similar situation, maybe not as rough. They did a lot of spending throughout the summer, and everybody was wondering where's all this money coming from, especially from a team that declared to be having some financial situations. In your opinion, what are some things that they need to do, though?
Yeah, see, I think the Barcelona thing stems from their past success. And when you get rid of somebody like Messi, I understand how monumental that is, but it was very known that it was going to be rough as soon as Messi left. And it was also known that Messi was going to leave. I think Barcelona's problem is they didn't really necessarily have a succession plan for Messi and realize that life was a lot tougher without him than they may have expected. Mm-hmm. That, on top of the fact that they have traditionally been such a good Champions League team, is like expectations are through the roof because of the name Barcelona. But granted, obviously they flamed out in a terrible way. But and the adverse effect of what I'm talking about Juventus is that Barcelona is still, I mean, the league is not the greatest, but they're still in the running. I mean, obviously Madrid wins the Clásico and there's things of question, but you mentioned Ansu Fati earlier. Players that are young, that have their spot there, that could really mature and develop. So I think Barcelona, while the pressure is very high because of their stature, I think they're in a good place where it just needs to be a gradual build. It can't be like, hey, we need to win right now. And I think Xavi said it after they lost their last game in the Champions League, like, hey, like hopefully the trophies come, but it's not going to be right now. Like it might be 2023, something like that, where we have time to kind of develop. When you have a player like Lewandowski, who's a proven goal scorer, that just has your team at a different caliber. We know what he can do. But yeah, I think they just needed a kind of like a readaptation process. And I think they're going through that now, unfortunately, the hard way. But for them, if they can stay consistent in the La Liga race, it's going to build a lot of confidence for that group going forward to whatever they have to, focus on next year. And then, obviously, depending on what they do in the Europa League, that could be maybe a goal for them to say, hey, you know what? This is not what we expected, but if we could make a run here and maybe win it, that thing that trends in the right direction for them. So I think Barcelona's situation is not easy, but I think it's very overblown in the sense that it's just Barcelona, where they're completely opposite of what Juventus. I feel like they kind of went through a little bit of an overhaul. They're kind of relying on these new players, and it's like, hey, give them time. Like Champions League stage is massive. Maybe it wasn't in the cards this year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a team like that be able to succeed with this kind of core that they have now in the next few seasons. So I think they're in a better spot than they were when everybody was panicking. But yeah, there's definitely work to be done for sure.
I agree with you in part in Barcelona. I think for me, there's a situation going on with Barcelona. And I think it's Laporta, his eagerness to bring Barcelona back to the standard that they once had is getting the better of him. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is when you look at some of these contracts that were financed, it's pretty hefty amounts of money that if something was to go wrong with the club, you'll be looking at bankruptcy immediately. It's a very risky card to be played. While I admire the risk that he's taking, at the same time, I don't, because then it leaves for no financial backing for this club to then, in the potential of something really bad happening, be able to rebuild. So that's for one. Number two, I think they need to sell some stars. They have a lot of young talent that's still being sat on the bench over some of the more established names. And I can understand why, especially for Xavi as a coach. he needs to build that confidence again, and the club being able to be that that driving force in Europe once again. But you need to either sell some of those stars or loan them out and be able to open up some cash room in there, so that in the case of Lewandowski being hurt for the rest of the season, or Jules Koundé or Frankie de Jong being done for the season, that you can bring somebody on loan and be able to pay out that somebody on loan as well. I think realistically there is a lack of culture at Barcelona as well. There isn't, in my opinion, there just really isn't much of a culture. It's just much of a, we're Barcelona, we're that competitive team, and don't forget about us. But in reality, there hasn't really been a culture established by Xavi just yet to figure out what these team players are even about. There is no DNA when it comes to Barcelona, and right now, I think they also, in a way, need to abruptly find a way to get Piqué out of the club. I don't think. I think all the drama that's happening with Piqué, and I think all how he's perceiving it and how he's driving about it, is creating for a really bad culture showing in that locker room as well, that could create a lot of issues for Barcelona. So I think I agree with you. Barcelona's situation is a little bit less tougher, but I think it's a bit heavier focused, especially when you're looking at it from an outside looking in. They're basically that city upon a hill that everybody's looking at them to do something, and they are delivering nothing to the table. I agree with you. If it wasn't for Lewandowski, I don't think Barcelona would have been as competitive as they even tried to be this year in the Champions League. And again, if it isn't for Lewandowski, they really don't have an offense. That's another major factor that they need to account for, especially if Lewandowski is looking to be retired within the next 2 or 3 years. He's up there in age, and he's gonna want to find something slower pace than La Liga. So I agree with you. Let's jump onto the other side of the pond, as we call it here in New England. Liverpool currently right now in a kind of a tough situation for them for the past 5 years since they've been managed by Jurgen Klopp. This is the toughest that's been for them. They've been in some very good situations as of late, around with some championships and some opportunities to be at the very top of their league. Right now, they find themselves in an unfamiliar spot, and that fan base looks to be a little bit divided. Even though they try to hide it, they seem to be a little bit divided. If you were a Liverpool fan at this moment, what would your take be? Would you be in on Klopp, or would you want Klopp out and find somebody who could replace Jurgen Klopp?
Yeah, I think that's very tough because of his, let's say, persona. Like, he's just such a person. Like, Jurgen Klopp is a thing. But you mentioned it, and I think this is the most important thing, is they've been very successful over these past few years. Like, things that just winning trophies and winning tournaments. So, I mean, you can't forget that they were just in Champions League, and then they just won one a few years ago as well. So,
yep,
sure, there's reasons for fans being mad, and obviously injuries and Mane moving on and things like that. But the roster is still pretty solid. I think Luis Diaz has shown that he could be really good for that team. If he gets healthy and he's good, he could be solid and he could help that team do what they want. I just think that it's a very spur of the moment where fans are kind of like, oh man, we're struggling now, we need a change. And like I mentioned, this is such a haul when you go to Champions League and have to play tournaments is a lot. That's a long way to say I would be him in, but the way that this season may end could change that completely, because Premier League obviously is very tough, and the table it fluctuates, but you're not used to seeing them in the spot that they're in. And there's also things that they have to hit to be successful to move on. So you can't hold on to a coach for the sake of saying, hey, we've been good in the past and we had a bad season. So I think it's you're right. It's in the middle and kind of divided. I would be on the side in because of what he's done. But I think that the way that he navigates this tough path and how the season finishes in England, and whether or not they get bounced out of that Champions League spot is a big telling thing going forward, because clubs like that are not necessarily going to wait around and say, hey, you know
Mhm.
what, let's try it again next year. They're like, nah, we want to win now. We want to win everything. And once again, when you have the successes that you've had in these past 5 years, lifting trophies, it's not going to cut it when you're finishing middle of the table or so in EPL. So I think he could feel it. I think the pressure is on for sure. I think he said something recently about like trying to kind of calm the fans down. And once again, because of the type of person that he is, people may not have liked his message, but it is what it is. Like, that's the same coach that got them to this pedestal and got them to this level. So you also have to be a little bit appreciative of that. But I think that the pressure for sure is on there.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I wish my co-host was on, because he's a diehard Liverpool fan and he's been for years. But for me personally, as somebody who has basically gone through that same exact stage with another team that's a major club in England, I think right now your best option is to ride in with Klopp and actually look at the January transfer window to make some trades. Let go of some of the talent that you currently have in the bench that you're really not utilizing much, but could get some decent value, and bring some new identities onto the club. Maybe that's what you need. You need some new blood, some new drivers, somebody new to rely on. You found that in Luis Diaz when you moved Sadio Mane. Now you need to find, okay, who are my next pieces after that? At this point, I don't really necessarily see it as club's fault at all either. They are, unfortunately, they are swarmed with injuries this year, which this has been the most physically challenging year for Liverpool in the past 5 years so far.
Right.
But in a way, it kind of comes full circle. When Klopp took over this team, his first season, they ended in 8th place, and people were calling for him to be out.
I
They were
remember.
saying, oh, he's overhyped, but he doesn't deliver anything. And the next year, they won the league.
Right.
And it stopped a lot of people from running their mouths. I think at this point right now, they need to believe in him. And just to put something out there, if you're a Liverpool fan, you may not like this, but just because he relegated with Mainz and almost relegated with Dortmund, that doesn't mean that Liverpool's going to relegate. Liverpool's way too far of a big club to relegate.
Yeah.
And your locker room right now is far too big to even relegate. If you were Leeds, if you were Aston Villa, if you were Crystal Palace or Southampton, and you were in a really rough shape, I could see why you'd be worrying right now. But you're not any of those teams. You're not even any of them combined altogether. You're much bigger than they are right now. And you're still competing in Europe right now. You're in a very good place and you're competing. So right now, I think that the main focus for Liverpool fans needs to be giving this team confidence and being believers in them. I mean, your slogan, for Christ's sakes, is "You never walk alone." And right now, you're making Klopp feel like he's walking alone. So, I think if I was a Liverpool fan, I'd be embarrassed of the rest of my fan base being, Klopp out at this point.
Yeah.
But kind of speaking onto the transfer window, let's spend the night here with a transfer window real quick. January transfer window coming in quickly, immediately right after the World Cup. We know that some players are going to be the spotlight in the World Cup, and maybe some clubs will look to make a move for some of those spotlight players. I mean, it happened in 2014 for Real Madrid when they moved for James Rodriguez. In this January transfer window, though, who are some teams that you think will make a move to either strengthen themselves or to work on rebuilding themselves?
I think Liverpool's a perfect place to start.
Okay.
Liverpool, like maybe Chelsea, like these teams that have these expectations that they need to meet. And once again, England is at a different level. But when you're middling at the table right now and you know that, hey, this is not going well, but there's still road ahead and there could be things fixed. We know how quickly things could change. I mean, they're not that far out of the run, but the more results that come in, things could get pretty grim there. So I think teams like that are destinations that people want to go to, like off of, just history and name. Like if you put a team like Chelsea or Liverpool on the table for an ambitious player who may have a good tournament in the World Cup, sure they want to make that move. And especially if you're embracing a challenge of wanting them to step up and wanting them to, succeed a little more. So I think in the EPL, those two teams more than anything jump out because of how they kind of gotten off. And like you mentioned, it could also be the case of them moving players and not just necessarily bringing players in to make room to be able to do whatever they want to do with how they're going to build these rosters up. So I think those two teams are big. And I mean, we talked about Juventus as well, but I mean, once again, it's the same situation where that is a destination in Italy, knowing what they've done, and they need a lot of help, clearly. They maybe are not as enticing as they have been in the past, but mentioning the same thing, players that are young, that are hungry to make a move, they're going to more times than not say absolutely 1,000% yes to a team like Juventus. So I think they could be in the market for perhaps, making some moves there and trying to right these wrongs, because we mentioned throughout the whole program, if you kind of try to stick to your guns and ride certain things out and it gets worse, then now you're even working from further behind. Whereas you could use this transfer window to be able to boost these teams in different ways that are needed across the board there. So I think those three probably are on the top of my head right now for sure.
Yeah, for me, I agree with you. Those are very solid teams that I think could definitely be making some moves during the transfer window, either rebuilding or moving some cash around. For me, there are three teams right now in England and two around the world that I could see making a move. I'll start with the two around the world making a move. I think Real Madrid could be making a move in the January transfer window. I think after the scare that they have with Benzema and realizing that they really don't have much of a forward after him, I think they're going to be looking to invest on some youngster, or maybe be on the lookout as to who in the World Cup pops up for a forward. They definitely going to need him, especially after Benzema, and build around him. And I think another club that we could potentially see being rather busy as well in the January transfer window would be Ajax. I think after the clean out that they had and the money that they've been able to raise to some of the clean outs that they had, they will be looking to make some moves, especially for leagues that are not as often relied on to make transfers. But that's how Ajax has built that's their pedigree, right? We could see Ajax investing in Copa Libertadores or in Sudamericana, any of those in the South American continent. We could even see them trying to make some moves out of the MLS as well. But definitely be on the lookout for Ajax to be spending some money in the Americas, trying to bring some teams and some players over to their institution. And I think in England, there are three teams that still kind of need some help around the edges. If you look at them, we know Ten Hag came out today in a conference saying that they're desperately looking for two additional fullbacks to strengthen their team. Dalot has been heavily used and he's been very good for them. But after Dalot, there's really not much of a replacement. In fact, they're looking to make a move for the Aaron Wan-Bissaka contract, trying to move him out of the club as his services are just not needed in the Ten Hag football project that he's looking to build for United. And they need a left fullback as well. They moved Alex Telles. They don't really have much of a fullback at this point because Terrell Malacia, while he's been good, he's not been to the level that Ten Hag kind of expected him to be. And Luke Shaw could be injury prone this year as well, especially as the league gets tougher and tougher. So between the two, they don't really have much of a decisive left fullback that they could rely on and say, all right, we're all set and good to go. So United will definitely be one of them. I think Tottenham as well will be looking to make an additional move for forward and potentially a center mid. For forward, something happens to Kane or Kane decides that he's done with Tottenham and wants to move out somewhere else. They don't have somebody that can fill in his spot. So that's definitely a touchy subject for Antonio Conte and the Spurs at this point. And I think another team too that we will see the spotlight kind of shift over to is Aston Villa. They know we know right now that they got Unai Emery as their next coach. We know what Unai's made of. He's going to be wanting to change the tactics and the culture and how things work at Aston Villa, and he's going to need the money to make those moves. So expect Aston Villa to really be changing the locker room kind of drastically in this, either in the January transfer window or on the summer transfer window of 2023. But those are the teams that I expect to definitely be very busy in the transfer window. Other than that, any last minute thoughts, Andy?
No, I like that. I like that Aston Villa thought, because like you mentioned, we know and ambition, when you have a coach that's ambitious like that, man, they're going to come in hot. So that's a good one right there for sure.
And I feel like he's got a monkey on his shoulders. I feel like he's got something to prove in the Premier League. I mean, he was made fun of his accent all along while he was Arsenal's head coach. He was made fun of his tactics because they were antiquated, but not realizing that basically in a way, Mikel Arteta kind of utilize his tactics and then rebuild from there. So, definitely looking forward for Unai Emery to step back into the Premier League and be at a very high and competitive level that I know he can do very well at. With that said, episode 2 of season 2 concludes here. Make sure that you follow in Andy. Andy, plug in your socials, all your stuff where people can find you.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me. My Twitter is at Andy_Deossa, DEOSSA, where I post a lot of my work, obviously yahoosports.com. I'm excited for MLS season. Is going to be over this weekend, so I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for the World Cup to gear up. Hopefully it's a nice tournament. After all we just talked about, hopefully there's some star players that really prove themselves and are able to make a move, so we could ramp up for I guess 2023 and see how everything unfolds in the soccer world. But yeah, I'm excited, man. Soccer's always in a good spot because it's just never ending. And I think that we mentioned the World Cup in November is a little weird, but at the same time, it's also pretty cool. So it's gonna be fun, man. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, man. It's been I agree with you. Soccer is just never ending. There's always some new story coming up, and no matter what league it comes out, it's always a big story. So it always catches the eye of the world. So definitely excited for 2022 with soccer coming around the corner. But with that said, Andy, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Look forward to having you back on at some point again. Thank you so much for being part of episode 2. And until then, ladies and gentlemen, episode 2 concludes here. Diego DJ. Make sure that you're following us on Twitter at Podcast Card, on Spotify, and on YouTube as well at Yellow Card Podcast. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week.